Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. While disasters are unpredictable, one thing you can always count on is that people will panic. Most folks, meaning non-preppers, will keep their heads in the sand thinking nothing could ever possibly happen to them, and then absolutely lose their minds when something does. And when people's lives or even just their everyday convenience are threatened, one of the first things they do is rush to the store. They know they aren't prepared for whatever they're facing, so they try to make up for it at the last minute. But the problem with this is that most other people will be doing the exact same thing at the exact same time, and modern supermarkets and other stores like pharmacies and even hardware stores aren't designed to handle that. They rely on just-in-time delivery systems that become overwhelmed when people start buying a lot more than they usually would en masse. So today we're going to talk about the order in which this will happen. We'll talk about which items will disappear no matter what situation we're dealing with, along with which items will disappear if specific events were to take place. If you know this, you'll be in a better position to determine which items you need the most based on the scenarios you're most likely to face. And the first thing that'll disappear in any disaster is food. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a relatively small weather event or something more serious. When people know something bad is coming or an unexpected event takes place, they will always head to the grocery stores and start ransacking them. While the area I live in is fairly safe from things like hurricanes and wildfires, people absolutely lose their mess when they hear winter weather is headed our way. It almost seems like if somebody spills a red Solo cup with a little bit of ice on the road, folks go crazy and start panic buying everything. And what's interesting about this is that it's not just shelf-stable foods that people go after. As preppers, most of us would primarily be concerned with things that have a long shelf life, like canned or dry goods, because we know that the situation may last longer than expected, or we may just want to be able to hold on to those items for the next event if they don't get used up in this one. Then bottled water is another obvious one, but the scared masses will buy much more than these. Essential groceries like bread, produce, milk, juice, and eggs will be scooped up almost immediately. Then other things like crackers, chips, snacks, and even sandwich meat will disappear as well. Another thing I've seen go very quickly is sports drinks. Where I live, it isn't uncommon at all to see these stuffed into buggies right along with bottled water. So when something goes down, you can count on most groceries being totally wiped out. Another kind of food that'll disappear early on is baby food. If you have small children, you know that they can't eat just anything. Babies under 6 months old have to be fed either milk or formula, and that makes them and their families very vulnerable. So if you have children in that age range, be sure to have at least some formula on hand, even if mom is breastfeeding, because you never know what may happen to mom during a disaster, and having a backup plan could save your child's life. But with this, you'll need to find a variety that your child can handle because some babies can't digest everything. That's why there's so many varieties of formula out there. Our son was like that, and it took us a while to find something that worked for him. So only stockpile a variety that you know that your child can handle to save money. Then other baby care items like diapers and wipes will disappear quickly as well. And y'all, I've included an entire list of food items and other essentials preppers should have on hand in my ultimate stockpile checklist. It's free for anybody who signs up for my newsletter, and you can do that using the link in the description below. The next item that'll vanish in a crisis is one that I'm sure we all remember, and that's toilet paper. When most people know a disaster is coming, they think of two things: eating and wiping their butts. And when they get their food needs taken care of, they go straight for number two on their list in more ways than one. Now, most of us probably don't have enough storage space for an entire year's worth of poop sheets, but it is a good idea to have at least a couple of packages set aside so that you can get through at least some short-term weather events. Then other paper products like paper towels and paper plates are good to have as well, along with plasticware. Those can do a really good job of helping you reduce the amount of water that you need to use for cleaning purposes, but be sure to have plenty of trash bags as well. If everything else has fallen apart, there's a very good chance that trash services won't be running. So you need to be able to keep all that stuff contained. Heavy-duty contractor bags are best for this since they're thicker and less likely to get punctured. Another thing that'll disappear during most events is cash. While this would be most common for economic events, it'll still disappear anytime people think that banks and ATMs will be shut down. While we should all try to have the supplies that we need at home before things get bad, it's still not a bad idea to have at least $500 at home just in case you do need to pick something up. This should be in small denominations like ones and fives to prevent you from having to overpay if whoever you're buying stuff from isn't making change either because they can't or just because they don't want to. The next thing that would disappear in any sort of disaster is fuel, and this is especially true if you're dealing with an event that could cause widespread power outages. People will want gasoline and diesel to keep their vehicles running, and if they have a generator, they're going to need fuel for that too. So be sure to always have at least a couple of gas cans filled and ready to go, even if it is just for your car. Gas stations could have their power knocked out, and if you need to get away for a little while, you want to have the fuel that you would need to do that. Another fuel type that I've seen people panic by is propane. Before the last ice storm we had here, I noticed that there were a lot of folks getting their tanks filled up. Propane is obviously very useful if you have a camp stove or heater, but it can also be used in dual fuel generators. I have one of those, and I like to use whatever gasoline I have stored in it first and then move on to my propane. This helps prevent my gas from sitting too long, and it allows me to keep my propane, which has a much longer shelf life, in reserve until I need it. Then, after the most common fuel types, people also go after other things like butane, lamp oil, and firewood. And with these, you really need to have a good stockpile of your own, since once they run out, it could be a long time before they're back locally. These aren't as popular, meaning stores don't keep as much of them on hand, and they're not produced in as large of a scale as gas, diesel, or propane. So, less demand overall is probably going to translate to less urgency in getting them back on the shelves. Now, when it comes to firewood, if you have your own property that you can harvest that from, then good for you, yay! But if you don't, you'll have to wait on it to be harvested, processed, and put up for sale, and that could take time. A lot of that's also done locally, and if your entire community is dealing with the aftermath of a major event, the folks who would normally harvest and sell that firewood may have their hands full with other things. Then, of course, generators are another thing that people panic buy for pretty much any disaster. It's most common with weather events, like I'm sure most of us have all seen news stories of huge lines of hardware stores of people trying to buy one for a hurricane. But that could happen with other events as well. If people think that utilities will be affected in any way, a generator is going to be at the top of their list, and since they're expensive, most people aren't going to buy them until they're desperate and they know that they need one. But on the other hand, if you don't have a generator yet and you can limp your way through the next event to hit your area, whatever it may be, you may be able to get a good deal on one after things calm down. A lot of places don't accept returns on generators, especially if they've been used, and many folks aren't going to want them anymore, so that could be a good opportunity for you. But if people think they'll lose power, they'll also buy up any batteries they could find along with devices they could use in an outage. Battery-powered lanterns and flashlights will be scooped up no matter what, while fans will disappear in the summer months and heaters in the winter. There's also a good chance that camp stoves will be bought up, since most people have electric appliances in their homes that wouldn't be working anymore if the grid went down. And if you plan on using a camp stove or heater, I strongly recommend picking up an adapter hose for those devices that allow you to run them on 20-pound cylinders rather than the small 1-pound bottles. People will also buy up candles, but if you use these, you need to be very careful. House fires increase dramatically during blackouts, and the improper use of candles is a big cause of this. So, if you're using those or any other flame-based lighting or heat source, be sure to have smoke alarms, extra batteries for them, and also fire extinguishers. Then, also be sure to have long grill-style lighters for igniting camp stoves, heaters, or any other fire that you need to start. Another thing that'll disappear during any disaster is medications, especially those that people use regularly. If folks think that pharmacies will be shut down, they'll be desperate to get any prescription refills that they possibly can. But it doesn't even have to be prescriptions. Common pain relievers and fever reducers, stomach medications, and children's medications will be scooped up quickly. And during the winter months, decongestants and other meds used for colds and flus will vanish even faster than they would other times of the year. And also don't forget other things like electrolyte solutions and distilled water. Electrolyte solutions like Pedialyte can be used to help people rehydrate if they get a stomach bug, which is really important since the main danger of those types of illnesses is dehydration. Then distilled water can be used in humidifiers to help people with chest congestion. However, to use one of those, you would need a way to keep it powered up. Then there are other items that may not sell out for every small bump in the road, but when specific things happen, they can be very hard to find. Lumber's a good example of this. If people know something that could damage their homes is on the way, they'll scoop up plywood and dimensional lumber to do things like cover windows or just to have on hand for repairs. Most obvious example of this would be a hurricane, but it can happen with other events too, like riots. Then when people start panic buying building materials, they'll also want to have plenty of fasteners like nails and screws as well, because you got to attach them somehow. Tarps will also vanish in events where people's roofs are damaged and they need to cover them up. Then, before winter storms, people will buy up things like faucet covers, pipe insulation, and other things to protect their homes. And in the aftermath of a storm, chainsaws and axes will disappear if a lot of trees have fallen down. The next thing that'll disappear in certain events is sporting goods, mainly firearms and ammunition. Like with lumber, this can happen when riots start breaking out, but the bar for this is much, much lower. Rising crime nationally and locally can contribute to this, and if you've been in that world for any length of time, you know that all it takes is a tragedy or a politician speaking out of their rear end for people to go out and scoop up everything they can find. But those aren't the only sporting goods people may want. Water containers and filters could disappear if an area's water supplies are threatened, and if mid to long-term food shortages are on the horizon, then other hunting and even fishing gear may get bought up since people want to have more control over their family's food supply. Then the same thing could happen with gardening essentials as well. And anytime people think a major conflict could break out, gas masks suddenly become very, very popular. A lot of these are made overseas and are bought up by government agencies that tend to order thousands at a time. So those two factors combined would make it very difficult for normal people like us to buy gas masks and filters if things got really bad. Another thing that most of y'all probably remember from 2020 is how hard it was to find cleaning and hygiene supplies and also personal protective equipment. And if we were to have another major outbreak, you can be certain that all that would happen again. People scooped up sanitizing wipes as soon as they hit the shelves, along with other things like soap and hand sanitizer. N95 masks were non-existent for months, and even nitrile gloves became very hard to find, and the ones you could find were a lot more expensive than they used to be. And even though people tend to buy common medications in any disaster and an outbreak, it'll get much worse. Antiseptics, vitamins, and anything else people think could kill germs or boost their immune systems would get bought up very quickly. But of course, knowing the types of items that will disappear is only a small part of being prepared. So if you want to learn about the signs that a disaster is imminent, then click here. Or if you want to see places that you can hide your preps, then click here. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.